Rules Committee will come to order, and thank you very much for joining us today. The opportunity for us to meet without having snowstorm is amazing, but it's also good what a week has done to us. Today, the committee will consider two resolutions, H.Res.8 and H.Res.132. First, H.Res.132 provides for the expenses of certain committees of the House of Representatives in the 114th Congress. Second, H.Res.8 is a joint resolution that seeks to stop the National Labor Relations Board from implementing a recent ambush election rule. Passage of this joint resolution is important, and it's just the first step in bringing balance back to the National Labor Relations Board and protecting both employees and employers alike. And I want to thank the chairman of the committee, John Klein, for his work on the Education and Workforce Committee for bringing this rule to us. However, I also want to thank two very dear friends of the Rules Committee, and if Louise were here, and she will be in just a minute, she would share my thought and appreciation for the hard work that Candace Miller, as the chairperson of the House Admin Committee, and certainly her ranking member, the former chairman of the committee, have done not only to provide this body with adequate funding, but also to hear the testimony from all the committees about their needs and about balancing the things that we need. And so I know that Mr. Brady, I remember when he was the chairman of the committee, he most admirably performed these duties. And so I really want to thank both of you for being here today. I know it's been a tough time for both of you as we're in difficult times here in the United States Congress, as we have made a determination to reduce the amount of funding that we've had year over year, not only with the advent of sequestration, but other important activities, and so you're here at the right time. With that said, I want to defer to the gentleman, Judge Hastings, for any opening statement he would choose to make. Gentleman's recognized. Judge, thank you very much. Judge, just so you know, Louise and I went a few weeks ago to the committee and begged as best we could. And I will tell you that they understood, and I'm going to take a minute just to say it again, the needs of this Rules Committee are important to the entire operation of the House of Representatives. And we try and do the very best we can with the money that both of you give us, allocate to us, and we're delighted that you're both here. I think both of you understand that this committee is here to hear from members and to try and move forward the ideas and the legislation that you want. And so without objection, anything you have in writing will be entered the record, and the gentlewoman is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about our resolution here today. And as you mentioned, our committee, in a very bipartisan way, heard from both the chairman and the ranking members from every one of the committees. It took us over a two-day period, actually, to hear everything. And, of course, there were a lot more needs than there are resources.
Yes.
But on March the 4th, our committee favorably reported, actually by unanimous voice vote, Resolution 132. Setting these budget levels. Again, I think that the hearings were conducted in an extremely bipartisan manner. We tried to understand exactly what the needs of every one of the committees was, what everybody was looking for. And, you know, one of the things that I said during all of the hearings, and I think it bears repeating here today, because in the House, actually in the House, we have in the last couple of cycles, really in our efforts to be very fiscally conservative, not only with our individual MRAs for all of the various members, but also with the committee budgets. Since the 110th Congress, the House has had a 15% reduction in committee budgets. And I love the Senate, but I will just point out that the Senate has not reduced their funding at the same time that we have been doing that, other than what has happened with sequestration. And actually, the Executive Office of the President has had about a 30% increase since 2008. And I think given the fact that the Congress has got these oversight responsibilities, we have not really advantaged ourselves in our mission, our constitutional oversight responsibilities that we have. So the chair and the ranking member of every one of the committees worked very hard to talk about their individual budget priorities and what they were looking for. I will tell you that of all the committees, about half of them are still at level funding, including the House on Administration. The ranking member and I talked about it and thought that we probably could have used a little extra cash as well, but since there was a finite amount, we really tried to put ourselves as an example of, well, again, trying to be fiscally conservative. On the other hand, what we do have here is a overall proposed increase. If you look at it in the overall, as I say, about half have got level funding, about half not. It's 1.63% for 2015, 1.57% for 2016, which is very, very modest, I think. And as well as that, one of the other things we talked about and decided to do, there were a couple of different circumstances that might happen during the congressional session. For instance, Judiciary is talking about the possibility of an impeachment of a federal judge. If that were to happen, they would need extra money. If that does not happen, they wouldn't need the funds. So what we actually did is we put some money into a reserve for that. And you mentioned the testimony that our committee received from both yourself as the chair and your ranking member, Ms. Slaughter, which was very excellent. And I think one of the things that struck all of us, both the Republicans and the Democrats, was when you were talking about this industrial copy machine that the rules uses, and literally, if we are not going to fund a new copy machine, the entire Congress could come to an halt, which did not seem to be a very smart thing to us. So we did try to put some money in the budget to resource the Rules Committee. Looking at that, Armed Services was looking for more of an increase in what we were able to give them. On the other hand, I think sometimes you have to spend a dime to make a buck, and I know there's a lot of procurement kind of reformations that the HASC is looking to do. Veterans is looking, obviously, we're all aware of what happened with the oversight, the good oversight that was happening with the Veterans Committee and how that has to continue to help with our veterans. So I really think one thing that's important to note as well is that this funding resolution does not require any new spending, within the House's overall budget. So it is already a funding resolution that only redirects already appropriated resources within our budget. With that, I think, again, we tried to do everything that we could to fund the committees as we could. We really dived into exactly what they would do. Some of them that didn't even ask for an increase, like Rules, quite frankly. You came and said, I can live with level funding, but you should be aware of what could happen here if we don't get any kind of an increase. So we tried not to hold it against the chairman and the ranking member because they didn't ask for any money. We really were trying to understand exactly what your needs were and then fund it to that, to the best of our ability. So again, I wish we had some more to go around. On the other hand, I think we came up with a very good bipartisan product, and evidenced by the fact that it did pass unanimously. And with that, I appreciate the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brady, welcome. I'm delighted that you're here. I oftentimes walk behind on the floor a different direction, one direction. I get a chance to come back and see you and remind myself of your service to this body, and we're delighted that you're here, and the gentleman's recognized.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having me, and thank the Rules Committee. And it is, I do get that little pat on the back, and I do know I don't have to turn around anymore. I always know it's you.
Yes, sir.
But I do try to turn around. But he's moving pretty quickly, and he don't stay there too often now. I'm afraid if he stays on our side of the aisle, he's afraid he might get a rash or I don't know. But he moves out of there pretty quickly, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I joined my friend Chairman Miller today in urging the Committee on Rules to report a rule providing for consideration of H.Res.132, the primary expense resolution for House committees in the 114 Congress. The resolution was ordered reported from our committee by unanimous voice vote, and I strongly support this resolution. After 4 years of cuts and freezes, which inhibited the ability of some committees to pursue the most vigorous oversight and to retain professional staff, you know, as this committee and our committee, we rely a lot on our staff, and all the committees in Congress rely on our staff. And it's getting to a point that we keep cutting them and cutting them that we're going to lose them because they can make, look at the staff looking at me, nodding their head. We may lose them because they can make a lot more money in the private industry than they can here. But because of their dedication, who they are, and because of their concern of the American citizens and the American people, they stay. We just need to remind, we just keep cutting them. Maybe a little bit of a raise is nice to be able to do. And the resolution before you today moves in a welcome new direction. It provides a total increase of approximately 1.6 over the 113 congressional funding. And during our customary 2 full-day hearings on this resolution, we heard from every chair and ranking member. It was apparent that committees had achieved significant budget savings and efficiencies under the constraints of previous funding resolutions. In addition, all the ranking members were satisfied with the customary 2/3, 1/3 majority to minority ratio staffing and committee resources. I am not aware of any opposition to this resolution. In closing, I would like to thank Chairman Miller. Bittersweet. I think that it is announced that you may not be running for re-election again. And I know I know that we address ourselves as our friend, my dear friend, but believe me when I tell you, this is my dear friend. And I wish that all of us could ever, in this House of Congress, could get along like we get along. We do differ on 2% of things that are above our pay grade, but we don't differ with each other. So in closing, I'd like, again, thank Chairman Miller, her staff for the hard work and the cooperating spirit throughout this entire process, and thank you all for your consideration.
Ms. Brady, thank you very much. I tell you what we did agree on. Philadelphia did a great job for the convention.
Yeah, we're going to come
And
on.
we had a heck of a good time. And then, we turned to Philadelphia versus Dallas Cowboys, and you and I got in trouble again. So, we could always find.
Yeah, we
need to
stole
find
your running back.
commonalities. Yes, sir. Well, by the way, the gentlewoman just got here, Mrs. Slaughter, and she has had a chance to come and be with you and before the committee. I would now defer to the question period, but the gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you. I just want to say, Candace, I was so sorry to see that you weren't running again. We need more women around here, not fewer. So thank you for your great work. Indeed, my pleasure. No questions,
Okay.
except you and I get along pretty well, don't we?
As long as I do what I'm told to do.
Well, that's right.
Louise
Age
has
has its privileges.
Louise has one of these deals that's, let's compromise and do it her way. And we yeah, well, yeah. But thank you very much. I have believed for a long time that we do need to get along. And you are both living proof of that. And these are hard issues. These are very difficult. Judge Hastings, do you have any questions? Mr. Polis, do you have any questions for this great panel? Is there any Republican? Gentlemen, Mr. Cole's recognized.
I can't resist the opportunity to make a couple of quick comments, if I may. First, I want to associate myself with Mr. Brady's remarks, not only about his good friend, but about the staff, which he was absolutely accurate on. I want to say for the record, by the way, I was chief of staff at the Republican National Committee when we had that convention in Philadelphia. And number one, I got to tell you, Mayor Rendell was terrific, could not have been better. And then sadly, we lost him partway through and he became DNC chair. So he was really difficult to deal with, but what a great guy. And my favorite memory from that particular convention, I must say, was we showed up, and of course you've got a lot of great laborers helping you set up the convention and do all that. And they were all wearing, most of these very proud union members, they were all wearing T-shirts, Republicans for a week. So I thought that was about it.
That cost me $6,000, sir. But I had the pleasure of burning them after that week.
It was not lost to me. I thought it was one of the more gracious gestures I'd ever seen. But it'd be remiss for me not to say something about my good friend. You're going to get a lot of eulogies here in the next year and a half before you're gone. But I've had the good fortune of knowing my friend for long before we were in Congress. I first met her when she was a county supervisor, and we were mutual friends of Spencer Abraham, and she was working hard to help elect him to be the Republican National Committee. We didn't succeed that time. And then we served as Secretaries of State for 4 years and then arrived at Congress at the same time. And I have to say, and all that, well, you're still a young blonde. I'm an old guy. That's just the way it is. But the reality is, there hadn't anybody I've admired more in public service than my friend. I mean, just at every level, she's been a model of professionalism and integrity. I must say my nickname for her when she get up on the floor was the Blonde Bomber, because she's pretty tough when she wants to be, and nobody, frankly, more forceful on our side of the aisle in making our case in an appropriate way. But you just define what a good public servant is. You have every step of the career that you've had, and I hope, frankly, you do other things that not only you enjoy, but keep you actively involved in public service, because losing somebody like you is a real loss in a bipartisan sense. Loss to our institution, but a loss to the public life of your state and, frankly, our country. So, Candace, just thank you for your service. Thank you for your friendship. Come see us again, because I'll be equally fulsome in my praise every time I see you. And I'll pay your filing fee if you'll change your mind.
Thank you very, very much. Very nice things.
Yeah, all true. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I've been holding my fire knowing you'd be back again, but I would note that this committee, to a person, does recognize your service to our country, to this great institution, and the way that you have conducted yourself in making tough decisions is the kind of person, these are the kinds of people that you have to have experienced people. Otherwise, you'd get a different answer. Okay. Yes. Dr. Burgess?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, I need to add my accolades because we all were part of the same freshman class, what seems like many, many moons ago, and it has been a pleasure working with you. I want to say I support what you've done here, but Mr. Chairman, I'd be remiss if I didn't add the admonition. For some time, I don't think we have been spending the amount of money on oversight that is required of a federal government that is this large. And I would say that whether there was a Republican or Democrat at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. Some of the regrets I have in my first 2 terms in Congress is we weren't as aggressive with some of the oversight that perhaps we should have been in the Energy and Commerce Committee. I'm going to state the obvious, but I think that is the case now. And I think when the Democrats controlled both bodies, that they perhaps would have done better had they exercised some of their oversight authority of both presidents. As it turns out, both President Bush and President Obama were in the White House when the Democrats were in the majority. So I feel obligated to weigh in with that. I know it's been a tough time, and I'm very knowledgeable of the fact that I have to turn people down in my office all the time who come in asking for all kinds of good things. But this is one area where really I do worry that we're being penny wise and pound foolish. But thank you for your efforts in getting this done, and it is an important part of the overall process.
Dr. Burgess, thank you very much. Mr. Collins, do you seek time? I want to thank both of you for not only coming up here, but for your service to everybody. I think you look after people, and I think you do a great job. And I want to thank both of you very much for taking time to be with us today. Thank you. If you'll leave anything you have in writing for the awesome stenographer, she'll be able to put that into the record for you. Thank you very much. Chair would note that we are in the middle of a vote, but at this time, there are a good number of people who have not yet voted, and so I would like to, in the regard to time, invite the young chairman of the committee and his ranking member, Mr. Scott, to please feel free to come up and join us. Previously, Chairman Klein and Mr. Scott, we had a chance to introduce what you're here for. Anything you have in writing will be entered into the record, and the gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will submit my written remarks for the record. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks to the ranking member. This is something new for us. This is a Congressional Review Act action on the part of the Senate that has come our way. I've got several notes here, but in the interest of time and because we're in the middle of a vote, let me just say that the National Labor Relations Board is changing years of a system that has worked pretty well to allow workers who are interested in forming a union to petition for that union. It'll allow, the current system allows employers the time to figure out their position, to talk to their employees, and everybody can make an informed decision. The most recent action by the National Labor Relations Board in passing the rule, which will go in effect, I think, on April 1st, takes the time that employers have to respond to a request for a vote and shrinks it dramatically. An employer could have as little as a week, 7 days, to find an attorney, because most of your small employers don't have such a thing on staff, determine a position, get it set, and then they can't change it until after the whole process. and they may be faced with a union election in as few as 11 days. That really doesn't give employees a chance to learn what the issues are. It doesn't give employers a chance to communicate with them. And I think particularly egregious is their rule now requires that the employer provide personal information on all of their employees, name, address, email, phone number, which I don't think is in the best interest of the employees or the employer. As I said, many other notes here. It's called an ambush election by many of us because of the very, very short time frame that employers have and employees have to react to this. And so we think it's very, very bad policy. We've been talking about it in committee for well over a year, but they've made this rule. The Senate has acted under the Congressional Review Act and sent this over to us for action. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Scott, welcome to the Rules Committee. We're delighted that you're here. Obviously, you and I have a great background with each other and enjoy each other's company a lot. I hope today will be enjoyable for you, too. The gentleman's recognized.
Well, you've always been
Yes, sir.
very hospitable, not always agreeable, but hospitable. So good to be here.
Sounds like the way my mom and I are.
You ought to listen to your mother.
Well, you know what? That's exactly what Louise tells me.
You ought to. There's a lot of criminal justice stuff that you need to listen to her on.
Yes, sir.
She knows what she's talking about.
I know. I know she, I'm not her favorite member of Congress. I know that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, the National Labor Relations Board election rule was promulgated to make union elections more efficient and more fair. The current process to hold an election is badly broken. Actors can use litigation to stall elections for months and sometimes over a year. After workers have initially petitioned for an election, election delays provide opportunities for unscrupulous employers to engage in threats, coercion, intimidation, firing of their employees. These delays can be exploited to violate rights, including firing pro-union workers and threatening to close the plant if the workers vote a certain way. Researchers have shown that the longer the delay before an election, the more likely the employer was to engage in illegal conduct and violate those rights. This regulation provides targeted solutions to discrete, specifically identified problems. It will enable the board to better fulfill its responsibility to employees by fairly, accurately, and quickly resolving issues and questions of representation. Mr. Chairman, the election rule brings the board into the 21st century by updating the board's rules on transmission of documents and communications in light of modern communications technologies. These modest updates do not change substantive law, but will provide a reasonable time frame for an election without unreasonable delay. They've been informed by comments of over 75,000 public comments submitted over a period of 141 days and 4 days of oral testimony at hearings. Testimony totaled more than 1,000 transcribed pages. Mr. Chairman, the rule increases transparency, reduces frivolous litigation, and decreases the opportunity for bad actors to improperly delay union elections. This resolution of disapproval will override these well-thought-out regulations pursuant to the Congressional Review Act. Instead of moving forward with this resolution, Mr. Chairman, I would hope that it incidentally has already received a veto threat. We should be addressing stagnant wages, economic inequality, and working to improve opportunities for all Americans. Instead, we're here with a resolution that will undermine workers' rights and prevent government from becoming more efficient and more fair. For those reasons, Mr. Chairman, I would hope that the rule that you offer would just delete any reference to this resolution. The rest of the resolution appears to be very, very cordial and bipartisan, and that can go through without any objection. And I would hope you wouldn't mess up the resolution by including this bill as part of it.
Mr. Scott, thank you very much. Mrs. Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any questions, but I would like to ask unanimous consent to put the administration's statement of
Without
policy
objection.
in and quote from it just a little. Growing and sustaining the middle class requires strong and vital labor unions which help to build this nation's middle class and have been critical to raising workers' wages and putting in place worker protections that we enjoy today. Giving workers greater voice can help ensure that the link is restored between hard work and opportunity and that the benefits of the current economic recovery are more broadly shared. The NLRB's representation case procedures rule helps to level the playing field for workers so that they can more freely choose to make their voice heard. In doing so, it will help us to build an economy that gives greater economic opportunities and security for middle-class families and those working to join the middle class. And if the President were presented with H.Res.132, his senior advisors would recommend that he veto the resolution. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am. Does any other Democrat wish to seek time? Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
I just want to say, I think this is a bad idea, and I've seen firsthand in my own congressional district how the status quo doesn't work, where a company dragged out unnecessarily a union election, spent countless hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, to try to undermine it, engaged in coercive activities, you know, and then once the union was approved, failed to recognize the union essentially and dragged that out until they got enough votes to decertify it by only a handful of votes. I mean, I'm just this notion that we do so much in this Congress to make it more difficult for average working people to earn a decent wage, to be able to support a family, to be able to kind of thrive. We all talk about the importance of having the middle class do better in this economy. This is precisely the kind of thing that makes it more difficult, and I think it's a bad idea, and I hope we all vote it down.
Yes, gentleman, floor is
I ask
recognized.
unanimous consent to include in the record the General President, James Hoffa's statement in opposition, he being President of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters.
Without objection. The gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to submit to the record my recent op-ed in the roll call entitled "The Never-Ending Misguided Republican Attacks on the National Labor Relations Board." Essentially, we had hearings in our committee regarding this. Process-wise, when this Congressional Review Act is used, I want to point out, it needs a president's signature. So a president is not going to sign repealing his own rules and regulations, which are simply streamlining of the process under the current rules. We had testimony regarding its importance from witnesses, and I think it's absolutely critical that we continue to facilitate prompt decision-making from NLRB, which is in the interest of both businesses and organizers. Nobody benefits from having things tied up for months or weeks. There was even a case that came out in our hearing, I think it was a couple years, that there was no definitive answer. And by the time they finally got around to ruling, employees had moved on. People that were there weren't even there. Different subgroups had been dropped. We had very powerful testimony from a nurse who had worked on an organizing campaign that had dragged on for a long time. These things need a start and an end point. They're either going to form a union or they're not. The NLRB is there to adjudicate that. These rules enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of their ability to do so. And I encourage my colleagues to oppose this end run, which is also an example of Congress spinning its wheels, because it'll simply wind up with a presidential veto when it reaches his desk, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen, and without objection, we'll enter that article that you spoke about into the record. Thank you very much. Does any Republicans seek time? The gentleman from Oklahoma does seek time.
Just very quickly, the end run here is by the administration and the NLRB. It's not by your legislation, in my view, quite frankly. And giving people an adequate time to make their case, I think, and actually examine the issue makes a great deal of sense. So I appreciate the gentleman bringing the legislation to the floor. Look forward to supporting it. Yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Yield back time. Dr. Burgess.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I would just like to ask Chairman Klein, how do you react to the statement that the NLRB has been a fair arbiter of these decisions?
That's why they exist, to make sure that elections are fair. Clearly, the NLRB is almost always partisan, depends upon who's in the White House. It's usually a 3-2, so sometimes we would think that their decisions were fair and sometimes not. That's the nature of the beast. I think it is important that both employees and employers have a chance to make responsible decisions here, and this action by this NLRB that gives an employer, particularly a small employer, only 7 days to go find a labor lawyer, they never probably thought having one, get a case and put it in there, and then have to take that position to the end is simply not fair to the employer or to the employees. So I think that it's a very, very bad decision on the part of the NLRB, and I think this action by the Senate, and I hope us, to use the Congressional Review Act is the right thing to do.
And I agree with you, and I am glad to see us using the Congressional Review Act in this way. You can't spend any time talking to small, medium-sized employers and not understand the weight, the regulatory weight that they carry around with them. Of course, we all recognize that Affordable Care Act was a wet blanket on the economy. These regulations coming out of the NLRB are also injurious to job creation. We all say we're for that. We get down on the floor, that's what we all talk about. But there's also a regulatory side to this equation, and I, for one, am grateful that you're meeting that today. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Dr. Burgess. Does any other Republican seek time? Mr. Scott, gentleman's recognized.
If the gentleman would yield, or if you recognize me, that
Gentleman's
the election,
recognized.
the time for the election to take place could be as little as 11 days. It's 7 days is the only time you've got to go get your position in concrete, find a labor lawyer, and make your position known. There are so many things that are jammed up here. Even the eligibility of the people voting isn't determined until after the election. So in a system that's been around for 65 years, and where the average time to election is 38 days, this seems completely out of line, and clearly it's putting a lot of pressure on employers and employees that's not necessary. I yield back.
Seems reasonable to me to assume that somebody that was going to recalculate it would have calculated somewhere in the middle. I want to thank both of you for being here. I will just want to say to you, we're in the middle of a vote right now, and there's about 125 people that have not voted, so please don't forget to go do your duty and vote today. Thank you very much for appearing before the committee. We appreciate it very much, very much. We are now going to go into recess, and so oh, you want to do this? All right, here we go. I didn't know exactly where we were. We're going to go ahead, and the chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.Res.132, providing for the expenses of certain committees of the House of Representatives in the 114th Congress, a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on House Administration. The rule waives all points of order against consideration.
Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent. I ask unanimous consent to waive the reading of the resolution.
Thank you very much. We will waive that. The rules exist before us. So with that, you've now heard the motion. Is there amendment or discussion to that? Gentlewoman is recognized.
Just that I would like to call for a no vote. I certainly agree with what we've said over here, that if we're going to rebuild a middle class in this country, we're going to have a good, strong ability to do that. And I think this presents us with that. So I'll ask for a no vote.
Further discussion. Seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no.
No. Roll call, please.
The aye, it does pass, and the gentlewoman asks for a roll call vote. Clerk will query the committee.
Ms. Fox. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Burgess. Aye. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Stivers. Aye. Mr. Stivers, aye. Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins, aye. Ms. Slaughter.
No.
Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern. No. Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis. No. Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
5 yeas, 4 nays.
The motion is agreed to. Motion is agreed to. Well, I stopped here for a minute to make sure I had what I needed. Yeah, I tried to count very quickly. I noticed that the gentlewoman was quick on her feet. All right.
Yeah.
We will have the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Mrs. Fox, who will manage the rule.
And the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis.
Mr. Polis
for the
for
minority.
Democrats. We do not expect another meeting this week. We've now finished our committee work for the day. Yeah, you saw me go, hold on, I got to count and talk at the same time. Whoa. Mike moved on me.